Hey, folks, going to give it a couple of minutes for some more people to join, and then we can get started.
You're muted, Mike, if you're talking.
Oh, no, I'm not talking.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, I figure we'll give it a couple minutes for some more folks to join and get started. All right, so we could probably get started. I posted the meeting notes. Hey, David. Posted the meeting notes in chat here. Feel free to put your sort of name in. So as we get started, first things are, is there anybody who is new to the SLSA community meeting here who wants to maybe introduce themselves? Or actually, sorry, before I do that, let me do the spiel here. So just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. It'll be uploaded to YouTube shortly thereafter. And also your participation in this meeting is an agreement to abide by the OpenSSF Code of Conduct. Okay, so now, so is there anybody who is new to this meeting who wants to introduce themselves?
Hey, Mike, Donnie Asline, not new. I was here for the first several months, but I've been gone for most of the summer traveling, so just rejoining you guys.
Glad to have you.
Hi, I'm Nisha. Hey, Michael.
Hey.
Yeah, this is my first SLSA meeting. Nisha Kumar in Oracle Cloud.
I'm glad to have you.
Yeah, welcome.
Anybody else, or we can get right into the agenda. Okay, so we can get into the agenda here. So the so I know Aaron has a little bit of a presentation regarding some SLSA stuff with GitLab, but before kind of doing that, I think we wanted to just mostly give a couple of updates from the other work streams. And just so that we don't get off track, I think we do want to make sure that like these are mostly just updates and a couple of clarifications. And if folks are interested in sort of some of the details, feel free to attend the actual the different special interest groups for like whether it's the specification, the positioning, or the tooling working group. Cool. So first off, does somebody want to give a specification working group update? I can if, oh, okay, Melba. Go.
Well, I was just going to say that I know this week's meeting was canceled, but myself and a couple of other folks met for the hybrid model when you're talking about proprietary code and open source code. And so we did come up with a diagram, and I put it in Slack. So any comments on it, suggestions on how to improve, or maybe other use cases that we haven't considered, please feel free. That was the only thing I was going to say. Thanks.
Cool. That's definitely something that is, I know, super interesting, as one of the big open questions is Salsa open source, Salsa, closed source, and then what about stuff hybrid? Cool. So I know we didn't have the meeting this week because a bunch of folks are out of office, and then we're also not going to be having a meeting next week because of the U.S. holiday for the Salsa specification thing. But there are feel free to and I know it's somewhere in the, I don't have the link with me right this second, but there is the Salsa specification notes, as well as a 1.0 proposal for folks to kind of take a look at and see if it makes sense. And right now, I believe we're kind of just trying to mostly clarify some 1.0 specific like requirements and makes clarifications on some of those things, pull out requirements that maybe we're like, you know what, we're not including that in the scope for 1.0 right now, that sort of thing. So just feel free to sort of comment on that. Melba, did you want to talk about positioning?
Sure. We finalized the chart, or almost done finalizing the charter for the positioning. Put a link there. And we kind of need the steering committee members to kind of look through the charter. I think there's only one section that needs to be reworded, but the rest seems to be okay in terms of the content. In terms of our efforts for positioning, we are going to attempt to map the spreadsheet that several of us did for mapping SLSA to SSDF and other frameworks / regulations, and using OSCAL, which was something, Mike, that you made us aware of. Additionally, there's 1 to 2 blogs in progress. I think it was Sean, if I remember correctly, had shown off something that was pretty interesting. And so we all recommended that there would be some sort of blog posting about it. We weren't sure if it was going to be 1 or 2, but that's in progress. And the questions that we had from, I think it was yesterday's meeting or the day before, Mike, I think you had mentioned that originally OSCAL was used potentially for SLSA conformance, or could it be used for SLSA conformance? I think that was the question. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, so the idea would be, so OSCAL, for folks who are not familiar, is a language and sort of a model built by NIST. And the primary, there's a few primary goals, but the goals of it are stuff like have a unified language for describing controls, control catalogs, and those sorts of things, and mappings of controls and all that sort of stuff, so that you can have everything in something like XML, JSON, YAML, and then be able to easily have automation sort of generate the views into it. So, one of the big issues right today is people copy paste, oh, here I'm applying this NIST control, or I'm doing this SLSA thing, and they just copy paste. And then if SLSA updates, okay, now I need to copy paste the new one and, do that sort of stuff. Whereas it's more of an automated way of kind of managing that. And then with the further, goal being stuff like, and IBM has been doing stuff with this with their Trestle tool, is ways to actually tag, let's say, code that you could say, oh, this is essentially me tagging this piece of code or doing this sort of thing is proof, or this is the proof that I am, that my build is this sort of thing, which makes it SLSA, level 3 compliant or whatever. And then great, then you can just sort of generate reports on an ongoing basis. And it makes it much easier for audits and all that great stuff, as opposed to, what is often done today, at least in the enterprise, which is like, oh, I took a screenshot of my build. That's SLSA compliance or whatever. Yeah, so that's kind of OSCAL in a nutshell. And so it's very much in line with what we're trying to do from an automation perspective, and make it less manual, like somebody asserting they did a thing, and more of looking at the actual build tool and saying, yep, it did the thing.
And the only other thing was, while we were going through the charter, there was two sections which we've since condensed into one, talking about, educating and doing evangelism. And the question came up of, isn't that the intent of the adoption SIG, which isn't formed yet? But when reading the adoption SIG description, it seemed more focused around tooling. And so we thought maybe education and evangelism currently isn't within each SIG currently, until we get more adoption, more folks participating, and then we would potentially split up those two things from each of the SIGs into a formal group. So that was something that we wanted to get clarified, if that was the intent of adoption, or if we are thinking about education and evangelism not in the proper way.
I think that adoption would include some level of education and evangelism, but was more about working to actually integrate SLSA tooling into communities or ecosystems. I don't think there's a clear split for which kind of work stream education falls within. Kind of definitely there's some aspect in the tooling we develop and the documentation around that, and how we position relative to other emerging standards and things in the ecosystem. And definitely we'll have to educate people and evangelize or advocate for SLSA as we approach communities and talk about adopting. Bit of a non-answer.
Yeah, and that's fine. We were just trying to clarify, because a lot of what you said is in the charter for positioning, but we were trying to frame it in the sense of, educating and saying you should be using SLSA because of XYZ. It'll help you meet these, framework or regulations and being compliant, et cetera, et cetera. But then I started thinking about blogs, and I was like, well, I think someone had mentioned, it might have been Brandon, that some other working group or some other community, they got bigger, and so the blogs were handled by a team of people, right? And so that's where the discussion was coming from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, adoption, I'm just looking at the doc, and it was mostly kind of pause for now because we don't have a 1.0 spec or tooling to recommend, but the idea was to focus on early prototyping and outreach to open source projects specifically.
Cool. I guess we can switch to Melba. Did you have anything else for positioning? Or?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So we could get to, I guess, tooling. I have a link to what we've been currently working on in the meeting notes, which is just is essentially we're trying to kind of build out a list of requirements for sort of some of the pieces. There is the tooling working group is looking at a bunch of different categories, but right now we're really focused on the distribution and discovery piece, because there's a lot of work being done to do builders, right? There's the GitHub builder. Aaron's going to be giving a little bit of a presentation in a little while on some of the work he's been doing to integrate GitLab. There's a lot of stuff on that end, but there's really not a lot as far as the sort of distribution end, or there's still, there's a lot of work in progress on the distribution end, and it sounds like there's a lot of stuff there. So past couple of weeks, been talking with a few different folks. Actually, we had Mike, or one of the Mike Browns from OCI. There's apparently multiple from OCI and Containerd, who had come in and actually sort of talk through some of the new things that had been merged into the OCI spec, which will make SLSA distribution much easier, because now you can actually have like a SLSA type in the manifest, and it can point to this SLSA attestation, which would then allow folks to even do lots of nice little things like you can sort of verify that, hey, is there a salsa attestation for every layer, or does that matter, right? And that's kind of some of the discussions we've been having, is thinking through like, how do folks sort of view that? And also, we plan to sort of integrate, have some additional conversations with OCI folks on what makes the most sense from a salsa perspective, like how do we distribute these attestations via OCI long term? Because right now, to be clear, like, certain projects like Sigstore are doing it by sort of that naming convention of, the digest.att as the way of distributing salsa attestations. But longer term, you want to have that baked into OCI via the manifest, because it's just much nicer to use. And so, we're looking through like, hey, how does that work? And are there ways to eventually then do some of the other things that we know we want to do, like transitive salsa eventually, through stuff like the manifest, because you could just kind of, look through the layers, stuff like that. So we had some conversations on that end. We'll need to, they also suggested, by they, I mean, Mike suggested that we registered the salsa predicate or in toto or something like that as an artifact type with IANA. It'll make a lot of stuff a lot easier, but he said we want to make sure that we're pretty well solidified with what we're doing there. Like we have a pretty good understanding of what that would really, really look like. There's still some additional work happening on the NPM side. So there's that RFC is still open about integrating with Salsa and Sigstore. So on that end, they are currently saying that most likely it'll be a separate file, but potentially the NPM tool would automatically know when I pull down this package, also look at this over here, and that's how I can pull down a Salsa attestation and do that sort of stuff. So there's some stuff on that front. I can't remember who it was. Somebody was saying that they've been working with Maven Central to, oh no, sorry. Some folks from Google had said that they have been doing some work on including the attestation in the Maven package. And some folks have been talking about reaching out to, the folks who run Maven Central, like Sonatype, after the POC has been built out, to actually say, hey, does this make sense? Is this something that seems reasonable to sort of do, to actually include it in the Java package, whether it's a jar file or whatever. So that's kind of some of the big stuff that we've been working on recently. There's a couple other things real quick that we're still kind of talking through. One is out of band attestation distribution. So for package things that like OCI, NPM, Maven that don't have that feature yet, is there a general process / tool that we should be telling folks to kind of push, right? In toto recommends JSON lines for actually distributing stuff like in toto attestations, which Salsa is a type of. Distributing in toto attestations as files. So if we were to say, hey, great, we're going to do it that way, are there some best practices, some basic tools that we can sort of build out so that folks can say, okay, great, we are going to expect if you distribute, let's say your packages on GitHub, then we expect your JSON lines files to be living next to your actual package. There's some discussions that we're having on that front to kind of figure out some of those details. And then finally, and this is kind of more of a longer tail thing of, so as a reminder, Recore is mostly focused for proof that this thing happened in a certain thing and it hasn't been tampered with, like a tamper evident log of that thing happening. But it's not really intended to sort of distribute or discover attestations of just whatever, right? So we're talking to a few folks and there's some work being done on what would maybe some mechanisms for holding on to attestations so that folks can say, before I even look at a particular package, I want to know, does that package have a Salsa attestation? Because before I even download it, start exploring that thing, I want to know, are they building via Salsa? And so there's some stuff here about, how do we distribute those sorts of things, be able to run queries out of band. So on that front, but that's much longer tail. So that's everything from the tooling side.
Hi, Michael. I'd like to give a little bit of clarification on the OCI spec. So the reason why folks like Cosign are using the tag is because the registry itself does not support the refers API. So once we have registries that adopt that new API, you can actually use the refers field in the manifest to say that this is a SLSA attestation to this container image or this other kind of artifact.
Yep. Thanks for the clarification. Yeah. That makes sense. And yeah. So for other folks, just to make sure that it's clear. Yeah. It's just, we need, with the OCI stuff being merged in, as Nisha just mentioned, we just need to make sure that those things are actually now implemented in the OCI registry tools that are out there. And once they are, then it'll be really easy for SLSA to leverage it. Thanks. Any other questions about that? Otherwise, or any other comments? Otherwise, we can move on to Aaron's presentation.
I have one more question. Is Intoto the only tool that generates SLSA attestations right now? Or is there like any other thing that we are looking at? Or?
Well, so Intoto is just the spec that we're using. And we recommend it. It's not required, but it does seem to be essentially de facto right now, where pretty much as far as I've seen, the only folks who, we have in the spec, you just need to make sure that those fields exist and you can then say you're SLSA compliant. But with that said, practically, everybody's just sort of using the Intoto specification for that. But from a tooling perspective, anything that supports the Intoto stuff, that works with. So that's anything from various command line tools like Cosign or the SLSA generator stuff that's in the SLSA GitHub, as well as Tecton chains. There's, I believe, also there's a bunch of other tools as well that support it. So anything that supports the Intoto specification supports that. But also for folks who are, if you are generating that metadata in another way, technically you are sort of compliant with SLSA. The big concern, right, is we want to make sure that it is interoperable. And so we have been starting to suggest that folks, if they are generating the metadata in some other way, to also have some mechanism to convert it into Intoto.
Okay, so basically your recommendation is be conformant with the Intoto specification and you should be interoperable.
The recommendation is to be conformant with the Intoto attestation specification, which is different to the format that the Intoto tool currently generates. So that's nice and confusing for everyone involved. I can drop a link to, on the SLSA website, we try to describe like the attestation model and the different specifications involved and how they kind of fit together. Just drop that in the chat, and also a link to the Intoto attestation specification itself.
Thanks, Joshua. Yeah. So just to clarify, the reason I'm asking all these questions is because a bunch of us are working on an SPDX 3.0 build profile, and we are trying to make this compatible with SLSA. And it's a little difficult because of the way that this attestation is worded and the things that we are trying to munge into it are things like packages, well, basically products and services together. So in some ways, it's like trying to combine together two different concepts. But thanks for that.
Yeah, I know some folks working on SLSA have, I think like Mark Lodato from Google has started attending those build profile meetings.
Brendan Lum as well.
Yeah, I don't have anything concrete to suggest. But if maybe you could drop some details of the meeting in the minutes doc.
I'm sure it'll be shared back by Brandon and others. I am specifically trying to understand it from the SPDX point of view, so I'm also learning.
Yeah, and I think there's been still some conversations that have been going on about, there was some original discussions of should SLSA adopt build profiles or make it interoperable or whatever, or if generally, for example, if they're doing things that are separate enough that all you need to do is just, let's say, have a citation of a hash of saying, hey, they both point to the same hash, and that's what kind of, they're supporting different use cases, and they don't necessarily need to be 100% interoperable. David?
Yes, I mean, I think, again, as Nisha was saying, I think we're hoping that the Googlers attending the SPDX profiles calls will communicate that or help to be an intermediary or coordinate on those things. And I think what we're hoping is that at least, I'm not sure what interoperable, we don't want it to be contradictory. In other words, we're hoping that I guess that there's some sort of a superset of those. You can use this information and have a subset of it used for profiles and a subset used for SLSA. It may be the whole is just exactly identical, which would be ideal, but that at least we don't end up with definitions that are contradictory and that are confusing and don't allow don't allow the interoperability. In other words, that some definition in one just completely prevents it, has a completely different meaning in the semantics than what the other is expecting. So we're just, again, hoping that the Googlers attending both can try to ensure that the definitions are consistent.
Also, just a little bit of a thing there. So just as a reminder, SLSA is a whole community.
I mean, beyond the folks who represent Google, I think there is some the way that we've been looking at the SLSA specification and examples take into account things like managed services that are offering to build somebody's package, and not all ecosystems fit that model. And we're trying to get this profile to fit that model while at the same time trying to represent the same things that the attestations represent. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think on that end, I think, there's a whole lot of debate about what we can do, exactly, what belongs in what documents and at what level. And yeah, it makes sense to not be contradictory. There's also, I think, a lot of still, once again, and I think out of scope of this meeting of, stuff like, is an SBOM that is scanned after the fact still an SBOM versus an SBOM that's based on inputs or whatever. And I think there's lots of things there because, even among those tools, there's still contradictory information that's kind of being in there. But I do agree, at least generally, that we want to make sure that the metadata is interchangeable and that it should still represent largely the same sorts of things, and make sure that there's not confusion, that if somebody looks at an SBOM with this information and a SLSA thing with other information, largely, if they're both being built in the same sort of way, should not be contradictory.
Yeah, I'm sorry to take this on a tangent. It's just something that I'd like this community to keep in mind, that not all software is built using somebody else's managed service. especially the case with operating systems.
I'm not sure I follow. I mean, SLSA is just, you can generate a SLSA attestation from your laptop if you wanted to.
It's not about the location, it's about how. It's a matter of that it's not always, okay, here's some button to press, or here's some script, or this is an automatic artifact that comes out of something. That's how normally it was, but theoretically, I can just be even like looking at the transcript of a makefile output and then just typing that in manually step by step into a shell prompt. I mean, let's say that theoretically I have a SCIF and I can't even bring the software in to do whatever. I don't trust that, and I want to just manually type in the commands to build this application for whatever I put inside the SCIF.
I think this is largely out of scope of what SLSA is trying to achieve.
Okay, I mean.
That I did not understand. Is it really out of scope?
I mean, I'm just not sure. So like with SLSA, right, it's just about, there's different requirements for SLSA. And then you have, as long as you're following those requirements, you could be a different level of SLSA. And so, like, for example, you can be SLSA 1 running it locally, or generating the metadata locally in some way, right? But as you kind of go up higher and higher, there's increased sort of restrictions on stuff like what metadata is being, how the metadata is being generated.
Yeah, I think, Michael, it would actually make sense for you maybe to join the SPDX build profile meeting. But in the meantime, I think folks would like us to move on. So I'm moving on.
Oh yeah, and sorry, I have to hop off. I just realized.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, Nisha, if you want to add an agenda topic for a future meeting to circle back on this, or it looks like the specification working group would be another good place to bring this up. And yeah, just to catch you up on the Slack channel too. I'm not sure if you saw it. Maybe you're already familiar with the links that Adolfo posed, like some of the issues where some of this is. Maybe that was part of the earlier point, but. All right. So we will, yeah, we'll come back to that. Aaron, I wanted to give you the stage now since you were the first one in the agenda topic to take us on your presentation of GitLab and Cosign.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you. And I haven't rehearsed this, so we'll see how long it goes, but probably shouldn't take too long. Going to share my screen. Hopefully y'all can see my title slide. Cool. All right. So I'm Aaron Bakke. A lot of you know me, been in the meetings pretty often. Pretty happy because I was successful with, as far as I'm interpreting it, using GitLab and Cosign to achieve SLSA level 2. So I'm going to step you through kind of at a high level how I was able to do that. So I just kind of threw some of the verbiage from the SLSA website, just as a baseline. Right, it's a security framework looking to, help prevent, some of the supply chain style attacks, bringing more information to the actual artifact itself, so we can give that to our consumers of software. So the SLSA level 2 requirements are pretty straightforward as far as I'm concerned, right? So the source being version controlled, the build having a scripted build, and the build having a build service itself not running on a laptop, the provenance itself being available in the way that the consumer expects it to be available and formatted, having it be service generated, and then lastly, this is where the cosign piece comes in, having it be authenticated, the provenance itself. So the first 3 requirements are pretty easy to hit. Using GitLab, right, or even GitHub, right? So with GitLab, the source being version control, so we're using GitLab as the SCM system for the repository. The build being a scripted build. So we're using a GitLab CI YAML file to have that as a scripted running there. And then the build service being what's called the GitLab runner. So this is sort of a dedicated machine that is running as the build service and not just on my developer style laptop. So next, the provenance being available requirement is being met because the actual GitLab CI job is generating an artifact in the SLSA 0.2 provenance spec in that Untitled format. So we're able to work with the GitLab organization in formatting that and bringing those appropriate variables into the provenance itself and making that available. The service generation requirement is actually met from that build service being the GitLab runner, the 15.1 and above version of the GitLab runner. So when you have the GitLab runner and you're using your build script, right, the GitLab CI file, you can set an environmental variable that says runner generate artifacts metadata equals true. And this will tell the GitLab runner to generate a JSON file, which will store that provenance in the SLSA 0.2 format. And that job artifact, or the actual metadata artifact, is the job ID. So the GitLab CI job ID dash artifacts dash metadata.json. So you can see a quick example I have of one of the jobs artifacts after the stage ran or the job ran. So you can see I have some SBOMs, some container scanning results, and then the culmination of those artifacts being that SLSA metadata provenance document. So finally, the last requirement, having that actual SLSA metadata authenticated. So the authenticity and integrity can be verified by the consumer of that artifact and of that provenance metadata. So I'm using cosign to sign the SLSA provenance. Note that, you know, on our requirements for SLSA, it should be through a digital signature, accessible only to the service generating that provenance. So I'm not exactly meeting that because the cosign private key and the cosign password are these environmental variables that I have inserted into the CI. And so those are available, right? And those are being used as the private key, obviously, and the password for that to do that signature. One thing that I'm doing, though, is scoping those variables to an environment within GitLab. So that is kind of creating a little bit of a boundary, at least, so that other jobs that are not within that environment or scope to that environment, they can't use or they can't even see those more sensitive variables. So with cosign, what I'm doing is, right, I'm finding, using the find, that artifact metadata file, and then I'm executing cosign sign blob with my private key, and then I'm outputting a signature with the name of that metadata file .signature, right? So then I'm storing those signatures so that I can distribute them later to my consumers. So let's see here. So what do I get from achieving SLSA level 2? Not just a lousy t-shirt, right? So now I'm able to have my consumers gain a greater confidence in the origin of the software that I'm producing, right? So now they can review and authenticate the provenance, and that's also a format. And they can use a policy engine to verify that the build integrity is a little bit higher caliber, or, you know, hopefully what they expect to see, you know, for that metadata itself of the artifact that they're going to be consuming. So that's, you know, bringing the confidence level up rather than SLSA 0 or -1 SLSA. And, you know, now we're able to have a little bit more information about the artifact. So the roadmap for SLSA 3, right, I'm not able to exactly get there by myself. So I'm working with Sam White, who's on the call from GitLab. They're actually, seems like they're getting there pretty soon to meet some of the SLSA 3 requirements, specifically the non-falsifiable provenance requirement. So this is that thing that I was talking about where the should wasn't met before, because now the GitLab runner is going to be, the build service is going to be generating the provenance and also using hopefully cosign to do the, I believe the keyless signature onto the actual provenance itself. So I won't even have to do that job or that step that I was showing earlier, because now the build service will be signing that and providing the signature for the metadata. So in theory, out of the box, you'll be able to get SLSA level 2 requirements, kind of like I just showed, just from having the metadata generated and signed by the build service, right along with meeting some of those other requirements I reviewed. And then there's a couple other steps for SLSA level 3, which I'm going to be tracking towards to try to meet that in the near future. So that's the presentation at a high level. I'm going to stop sharing and see if anyone has any questions.
You don't mind I say woohoo.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Joshua, you have a question? Or are you just high-fiving? Oh no, you're clapping.
I'm just applauding. Yeah.
We
I'm
want to
just
know what
wondering
you're
where to get the t-shirt
Yeah, exactly.
and why Aaron's not wearing one today.
I know, I should have got them printed. Well, I made this presentation on Monday, so.
Yeah, actually, fair point on the presentation. Is there a URL to link to?
I don't have it publicly available. I know that these meetings are recorded, put on YouTube, so at least we can do that. Might be talking to GitLab about making some sort of blog, and also maybe Sigstore about making some sort of blog post about it.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
Sam, anything we can do to help on your side from the GitLab stuff? Or you guys have, I see a couple people linked to the issue.
Yeah, we can always use help reviewing things to make sure that our implementation plan is good. GitLab is open source, and these are going in our free edition. So, you know, of course, on the development side, community contributions are always welcome. I will just add our eventual vision here is to have to flip the variable so that these things generate attestation and are signed by default. And then you can opt certain jobs out of it if it doesn't make sense to generate attestation and sign artifacts for a certain job. You know, thinking about the long-term vision of where software supply chain security is headed, we really see a need for all packages to have SLSA 2 attestation produced and to be properly signed. And so rather than relying on individual projects to adopt this one by one, that's going to be a really long uphill battle. We're trying to make this set up in a way that it can be turned on by default as much as possible. So that's our vision. Turning that on by default is a breaking change. So for us, it'll have to wait until May for our 16.0 release when we allow breaking changes. But that is at least currently our roadmap vision and our plan.
That's awesome. Adolfo, you got a question?
Yeah, this is a question. Well, I have some questions about signing. So
Can you
well,
speak up a little? You're a little quiet.
Yeah, so it's a question about signing. So the first one, I guess, is for Sam. So do you think, is it in your plans to support providing OIDCs that we can, OIDC tokens that we can use for keyless signing with Sigstore?
Yeah, so just to clarify on that issue, the plan at the moment is actually to use Folkio to generate a short-lived 20-minute long private key for signing, and then we'll just sign it natively. So that way, the only entity, the only thing that ever has access to that private key would be the GitLab runner, and the GitLab runner only. You wouldn't even need necessarily to pass in a private key to do that signing.
But are you planning on offering that to the OIDC tokens to get the identity of the runner during the build?
I am not sure about that. We'll
Okay.
I would have to follow up on that. I'm not
That's,
sure
so,
fully understanding quite what you're proposing. You're saying to have the runner itself authenticated with an OIDC provider that you could then authenticate the runner, or
yeah, so that you can take those tokens and do identity stuff with them, mainly for using them for to sign keylessly.
yeah, I mean, ultimately there's a root CA somewhere, and that's where you would validate it. I'm not sure if that's the answer to your question. I might have to take this one offline, I'm afraid.
Yeah, okay, no worries. I can dig into the issues to see what the plans are also. And the other is, I guess, for Aaron. So I saw that did you ever consider wrapping the attestation in something like DSSA, DSSE, and DSSE envelope? Or why did you prefer to have the signature on the file?
Yeah, so like you're asking why I'm kind of like storing the .signature file later. I kind of try to just keep it simple. So my consumer can take it is a laundry list of files, right? And then validate that later. I'm definitely keen and interested in learning more. I honestly just don't know as much about the envelope. That seems really interesting to me.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'm not questioning it. It's just that I'm dealing kind of the same thing about just as opposed to attaching the attestations to images. How do I provide those attestations to when it's about files? So I just
well, just to quickly kind of jump on that, the way that these attestations are being created, if you have a lot of artifacts coming out of your build, you're actually going to have a lot of SLSA attestations, right? At the end of the day, it's not just one attestation to hand over. So maybe that's what you're kind of referring to with the envelope, which I want to look into more as well. Keep it simpler.
Yeah, you can have one and just add everything in the same subject. But...
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions for Aaron? Nope. Cool. David, I'm going to put you on the spot while you're here because I noticed I had an action item from last time to get an update on what's happening at the TAC level. I think we had, Melba, do you remember the specific questions we had?
Yeah, it was around what they were going to do with SLSA, because SLSA isn't, the way it's organized is very different. And so they were considering potentially bringing out SLSA, or somebody had mentioned maybe we should bring out SLSA out from under the supply chain integrity working group. So I was just wondering what they were going to do with SLSA.
I don't, I mean, if that was mentioned in passing, it certainly hasn't raised up. If anything, the way that SLSA works is now increasingly the way everybody else is working. So, I mean, it really just comes down to working groups typically work on multiple things and start firing off other groups when they get too big. And so SLSA, I mean, SLSA is not the only one. The best practices badge and scorecards have their own gatherings. The best practices working group has an education SIG that has then split into 3 other groups.
Okay.
Because after a certain point, having a meeting of thousands trying to do everything is not nearly as efficient as having a small group focused on something specific. So the TAC, most recently, I mean, the TAC has been trying to kind of keep up with what's going on, but they're almost wrapped up. They're voting right now, and I think it's about to get approved on a pull request called 112, which is basically going to try to formalize a lot of stuff that's been happening in the past. And so I mean, SLSA is part of, as far as I know, SLSA is absolutely still part of the supply chain integrity working group. And so the intent is the SLSA should occasionally report up to the working group should occasionally report up to TAC, more just so that people are at least, so that the right hand at least is vaguely aware of what the left hand is doing. Yeah, so right now one thing that is coming to fruition, but it's a naming thing. It's not anything serious, I don't think, is if something is primary, it does a lot of code, we want to keep calling them projects. But if it's not code, it's more of a spec. I think they want to switch over the terminology to call them SIGs instead. I mean, that's just a
Yes.
naming convention. It doesn't
Ye-
really affect
Yes.
what's
Yes.
done. It's just a naming convention.
That's what brought up the topic of salsa.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Salsa
It's not
is
a
both.
kickout, it's just a renaming.
Yeah. Yeah. Salsa is both. It's not one or the other.
Right. You're not the only one with that challenge. I lead the best practices badge, same issue. We've got code. We also have a spec. But the code's a lot of the actual work at this point. So I'm probably just going to leave calling it a project. But of course, it has a spec. Scorecards is the same problem. Salsa has, I don't know if it's a problem, but same situation. So I think I probably would raise back up to the tag. All right, what do you mean when we do both? But I think in cases where you do both, well, I mean, I'm not the TAC. I would suggest try to make a reasonable determination, justify it, mention it, and see if anybody screams and hollers. But calling something a project or a SIG, the goal is to be helpful, to help people understand. It's not you have to be, it has to be, you have to name things instantaneously or somebody will beat you over the head. The goal is to make progress and try to make things clearer. Do we have a TAC member on here? In which case, I should dump it on a TAC member instead.
I know, I never know. And then I saw you, and I was like, I think David goes to those meetings. I can never make them.
Yeah, I do go to those meetings. I am not a TAC member. I am here to try to be helpful and support and help folks out. But I can't formally speak for the TAC. But that said, I mean, really, right now, in the transition from no money to actual money, they wanted to formalize stuff, which is fine. But that's kind of been taking up some of their time. But I know of nothing that says, hey, salsa kick out. No. It's a hey, we may rename to a SIG.
I think there was some informal discussion in a kind of sidebar in a TAC meeting about whether salsa fits or how salsa fits in the new like proposed structure in that PR you mentioned, 112.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that I can answer.
It was.
I think that's fairly straightforward. We've got several working groups, and the working groups routinely kick off other groups inside them, calling them either projects or SIGs. Projects meaning more code focused, SIG meaning not code focused. And obviously, in the case of something like salsa, or even worse, the best practices badge and scorecards, they do both. I have to admit, I think of salsa as more a not code. There is code, but it's the spec that I think everybody focuses on. At least in the past. Now, as more and more code and tools gets involved, maybe that's wrong. But if we decide to have one name and rename to something else, that's not really a problem. They just want to have a way of you're within this working group and that reports to the TAC so that there's an opportunity to hear about other things as opposed to the big surprise 12 months later. That's what they're trying to avoid.
Yeah, I think it's mostly about making sure that all the groups are connected, right? And so
that's right. And it's not even I can't show up at every meeting, in spite of rumors to the contrary. So no matter what, there will always be something you heard about more recently than when it happened. It's just the nature of bigger projects. But trying to limit it to 5 people is not a solution in a big problem like this. So we're trying to let people move forward fast, while at least giving an opportunity to share information as we go. And I'll note, OpenSSF Day EU is coming up. That's an awesome opportunity to try to get some word out.
Nice.
I don't think we have a salsa talk there though.
I don't know. There may be a supply chain integrity slot.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, in any case, regardless of that particular day, I mean, the goal is to, hey, occasional report through the working group up to the TAC, and that way at least there's some awareness. And by all means, blog posts and other things to try to keep people aware of what's going on.
Cool. Alrighty, I think that is it for today. Any last minute questions, comments? No. All right, everyone, have a good day. And thanks again, Aaron and Sam, for the great demo. It was awesome.
Thank you.
All right, later.